Eric, we are back with another episode.
Back with a vengeance.
Yeah, some would say they said we were done. They said we had no chance.
But neither one of us has deadlifted over 700 pounds or squatted 600, but we understand the spirit of that. So shout out to Lane Norton.
Yeah.
They couldn't hold you down, and we won't let them hold us down, my friend.
Yeah.
It's good to be back, Omar. Tell you what.
After all the controversies that they try to make stick and they couldn't, I will correct you though, Eric. And by correct you, I mean we're both agreeing with what I'm about to say. That while we can't individually deadlift 700 pounds, we're a package deal. We absolutely can tandem deadlift 700 pounds. And I think that's all that's really important. So whenever someone says, like, how much do you bench? We say collectively over 500. When they say, how much can you squat? We say, there's too much. You can't load it on the bar. Because they're not asking how much are you, like you as a person, it's you, the Iron Cult, and we rule atop the pyramid together. So yeah, sorry, Lane, like that real impressive, taking second in worlds, like winning a USAPL nationals, deadlifting over 700. These are all profound accomplishments. But Eric and myself can tandem out deadlift you, and we're a package deal. We count as one person. So,
and more importantly, has anyone ever seen two guys tandem squat?
This is true. I think it would be Eric about this.
It might be possible.
I think it would be probably pretty easy. I would just need either you need to crouch down, or I would just wear like my 1 inch, weightlifting shoes, and you'd go flats. I think it's entirely possible.
We just put clips on the bar and we're fine. It shifts a little more towards you. That's fine. You're a slightly stronger squatter than me. We're good.
Hey, Eric, serious question. Like, this is tangent number one. We're going to get on it, folks. But we've seen the tandem deadlifts, not the utility of them. There isn't any. It's fun. A tandem squat, I would assume, with clips and two people that are coordinated with one another, so one's not like dive bombing it. I don't think it would pose a major threat. And I do think it'd be possible to lift some pretty gnarly weight. I'm not trying to give anyone any ideas. I'm actually not trying to get the Iron Cult finally sued and our very real Delaware lawyers involved, but...
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and just shift into a moment of seriousness for this. Just for the listeners who might be thinking the same thing as Omar, don't do this. Yeah. I'm just going to put that out there because I don't know if it's safe.
Yeah.
I literally just made this a joke, and I'm worried. I'm worried now. I'm worried for the cult, Omar.
Oh, no. You know who's the most impressionable out of our listeners?
All of them?
The TTC, the TikTok crew. Which,
that's true. That's the youngins on the TTC. You're right. You're right.
They're currently doing the dances, like kind of inching forward towards the rack, thinking about it. And we're saying, that's why you have to give a verbal reprimand. No, do not do this. So one, we can, basically remove the responsibility from ourselves, and we could say with a clean conscience, like, hey, we warned everyone. Yeah, we flirted with the idea. We joked. This is a conversational podcast. We entertained certain ideas, but that is just the nature of conversation or the nature of a dialogue, that you entertain certain ideas and then you reject them. And Eric, maybe that is the most seamless transition Iron Culture has ever had to the topic du jour, which is, reflections on certain things. It has become a meme if we talk about Peri-Workout Nutrition, where 10 years ago, to set the scene of the slaughter, it was one of those things that the magnitude of impact that people assumed when we say Peri-Workout Nutrition, so, protein, carbohydrates, the interplay therein between them, that it was a good deal more important, that if you didn't have, protein, carbohydrates, depending upon who you spoke to, either pre, during, so intra or post, you were suffering, or you would suffer from, catabolism or a litany of other potential things, or not be privy to some potential benefits of, anabolism that one would experience if you just got, 0.2 kg per, a kilo of body weight or what have you. So I understand there's something going on that's very interesting as it relates to peri-workout nutrition and carbohydrates. Do you dare or care to discuss?
Yeah, man. So I think that was a perfect segue, and to even make it a little more perfect, that tandem squat was essentially us saying, there's a cookie jar in the kitchen, young children. Don't eat any. So now we know that by saying that cookie jar will forever be sanctified, and no one will ever put their hand in it. So please at us when you get hurt doing a tandem squat is what I'm saying. No, but in all seriousness, that is actually a pretty good segue too. Now, as I talk about cookies, we're going to talk about Peri-Workout Nutrition. So first, Omar, what I will say is for those who are curious about the latest data on protein intake surrounding training, definitely check out our protein episode. We covered that topic in pretty good depth along with everything else. Is it snowing outside there, Omar?
Is it kind of it's hard for me to see the reflection in my windows. Yeah. No, it is. So I'll give Celsius and I'll give Fahrenheit. It is minus 18 Celsius. It's like minus 1 degree Fahrenheit right now. And it is snowing. It's picturesque, but there's a lot of black ice. You've had black ice in Northern California, NorCal? Sacramento?
No, no, it does not snow.
But have you experienced black ice, as they call it, where it's like invisible, you can't see it, but like you walk on that thing, it's whoosh, like that's a concussion right there.
Doesn't get that cold in Sacramento.
Damn. So this right here is okay. We're in the the Mines of Moria, where the Misty Mountains, where they're ascending. You're in New Zealand, bro. This is basically it right here.
All right. And all I want to say is it's picturesque. I can see a white roof behind you, and I just feel warmed by this moment.
The cookies,
and your background,
the cookies in your heart.
They are. And all the people who are watching on video, you get it. And everyone else is going, Eric, shut the hell up and get back to it. You're literally in the middle of a sentence about Peri-Workout Nutrition. So sorry. But just, you got to comment on the snow globe outside. So anyway, we've covered protein, and essentially, you probably want to have a number of even feedings per day, hit your total intake, and it wouldn't be a bad idea for 2 of those to be within a few hours on either side of your training. And it's not that complicated. It's easy, and it doesn't make that big of a difference. Yeah. But the question mark, and I wouldn't even say it's a question mark, because like you said, the kind of meme perception is that meal timing and peri-workout carbohydrate intake is it doesn't do anything for resistance training. It doesn't matter. But the actual body of literature is, well, I think people get the perception that it doesn't matter because it's mixed. There are some studies where they do not observe an effect, and there are some studies where they do observe an effect. And well, that's interesting. That kind of, it's almost a cliche statement now in the evidence-based community where we go, oh, that's neutral to positive, but, and I pretty much, that's just me on my own doing that all the time. So I have made that cliche, but I'm going to go with it. So the data overall, if you kind of just look at it kind of subjectively, it's probably neutral to positive. However, I am, first thought, I want to give a shout out to my master's and potentially future PhD student, Andrew King. He has been looking at this for the better part of a year now. And, he's been a little bit slowed down by the COVID lockdowns that we've had here. And he hasn't yet completed his crossover study, which I think is going to be really cool. However, what he has, he prospectively pre-registered this, and he's been working on it in the time where we couldn't be in the lab, is a meta-analysis specifically looking at the effect of carbohydrate on resistance training performance. Now, I'm saying this because it is pre-registered. You can find this on the Open Science Framework, where you can see the actual trial, but it is in peer review, so I can't talk about the specific results of the meta-analysis. However, anyone can go look at all the various studies that are out there on pre-workout feeding of carbohydrate to influence resistance training performance. And they could probably make similar qualitative conclusions to what we found, and then what we were, I'm just going to say, confirmed by the actual meta-analysis itself. So anyway, for those who don't know, meta-analysis, you take all the given studies on a topic, pool the results together. You do some additional analyses to make sure that there isn't too much heterogeneity between studies. You correct for things like that. You weight them properly. You make sure you're not double counting, and you get a pretty good idea of the overall effect. And then you can look at different moderators. You can do things like a quote unquote meta regression, which is basically like a regression analysis, seeing, okay, does the dose response of certain things affect what's going on? So for example, in the classic meta-analysis most people are aware of, led by Morton in 2018, that I was a part of on protein, they did like a breakpoint analysis, kind of a meta regression of seeing, hey, at what point do you stop getting benefits from protein intake in terms of muscle mass? And it's somewhere between that, 1 gram per kg all the way up to 2.2. And if we took the upper half of that confidence interval is 1.6 to 2.2. And that's where that general recommendation of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kg of protein comes from, or 0.7 to 1 gram per pound. So anyway, things like that we did as well. We're looking at the number of sets, looking at the dose of carbohydrate, looking at total training, looking at the time spent in a fasted state before you actually, get in the gym, have your meal, and start training, which might be a good dovetail conversation, Omar, about time-restricted feeding, which we could talk about. Because anytime you talk about pre-workout feeding or more meals or higher intake, you get the IF crowd going, hey, how does that affect me? Which is a valuable question. So anyway, like you said, the meme is generally that, hey, so long as you get enough macronutrients in a day, you get enough energy, and you're not doing something really outrageous or outlandish with your peri-workout meal timing, it probably doesn't matter. And it especially doesn't matter for the type of training that most lifters do, low rep training, or like if you're doing body part splits, do I really need to have, like a loaf of bread before I go hit, lateral raises, bis and tris kind of thing. And I think some of those arguments are valid. But overall, if you look at the literature, you can find some general trends pop up. First off, it doesn't seem like maximal expressions of power or maximal expressions of strength are impacted by carbohydrate intake. That is something that is relatively clear. So you need to go hit a 1RM, or you want to do like a low volume plyometric session, trying to see how do I improve my max jump height? Or let's say you're a shot putter. Having pre-workout carbohydrate is probably not going to make you throw the shot farther, jump higher, or squat a max. It just hasn't been observed. In fact, there is a lot of research that suggests that's simply not the case. However, where the research gets murky, Omar, is when we start to look at multiple sets. So for example, if you're going to do multiple sets to failure and we collate the number of total repetitions one did or the total volume, that's where we start to see that more often than not, the studies lean towards the carbohydrate supplemented group. And I think that's interesting. So that is really what the question that we sought to answer is what are the specific performance metrics of resistance training that are affected by carbohydrate, and then to what degree? And believe it or not, there hasn't been much actual quantitative analysis in this realm for resistance training, even though it has been done for endurance training a number of times. And it's like if you were to read a sports nutrition textbook and it gave you carbohydrate recommendations for an endurance athlete, plenty of references, and you couldn't quite do that for resistance training. I'd argue it to be difficult to now, because someone could just say, hey, well, what about this study where similar, but it didn't find, the same effect.
Eric, we're reviving ghosts of, bodybuilding's past. It's interesting to me because while you joked about the concept of neutral to positive, and I think once we remove the financial consideration, not from this carbohydrate conversation, but remember people a few episodes back where we're talking about strange but true, and you spoke about massages, and we spoke about things that might have a minor impact. That is it worth your time? Well, you have to balance that from a bunch of different things, but at the very least, there's nothing negative going on. The meme that has happened within the fitness space, I think there's always a reductionistic approach that inevitably occurs just because people want the soundbite. And so the idea is like, as we say, okay, we did that the Morden 2018. Yeah, protein, as long as within a rough time span and a certain amount, you're good. Like, okay, most people are already there. You're fine. And then even the role then of carbohydrates, where it's like, okay, carbohydrates in performance. Well, yeah, like what are you doing? You're working up to like a 1 rep max, or like you're just doing this. Like, do you really think, getting extra glucose intra-workout is going to improve performance? And people just, when they narrow it down. However, the thing I want to say before you continue that I find funny, it amuses me, is that powerlifters, shout out to my favorite, the swole boys and girls. They jokingly do something that isn't, as you just said, if you're going for maximum power or maximum strength, like a 1 rep max, you don't need to do it like it hasn't been shown. But have you not observed this? Strength athletes eating sugar while training just to pass the time. And I'm talking either like Sour Patch Kids or like anything else, but it has become one of those memes where it's like you're working up to a single and intra workout, you're munching on some Sour Patch Kids. Have you observed that in New Zealand? Have you seen? I know for sure. Probably in second. Yeah.
Yeah, they love their gummies here. So no, that is 100% a cross-cultural phenomenon among all powerlifters, which I don't know really where it came from.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this is what's happening or why they do it or that this is what's going on.
Yeah.
But it does, like, the really interesting question is, when carbohydrate does influence performance, why does it influence performance? And I think, that is something that we still need more research on. And it is actually relatively confusing because there's a lot of potential mechanisms. So I think we've talked about this maybe in passing.
Mouth
but
rinsing.
if we talked about, carbohydrate mouth rinsing, Omar.
But I think literally because we're on year 3 now, I think it was like 2 years ago. So totally revisit it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, a great, there's some great stuff on this, like a paper off the top of my head that someone could look up by Chambers and colleagues called Carbohydrate Sensing in the Human Mouth, Effects on Exercise Performance and Brain Activity. Yeah. So there is like sweet sensing in the mouth, or I should probably more accurately say carbohydrate sensing in the mouth has an effect on the brain and then can have a knock-on effect potentially on performance. This has been observed probably in the majority of studies where they've looked at this for endurance training, but in a minority of studies on resistance training. And if you were to try to characterize which studies for resistance training does carbohydrate mouth rinsing seem to have an effect, it is longer sessions with multiple exercises, multiple sets per exercise, and higher repetitions. So the more the resistance training starts to look like it has, similarities to endurance training, then the more there's a potential for carbohydrate mouth rinsing to have an effect. So what are we talking about with carbohydrate mouth rinsing? We're talking about, and sometimes this is interesting. So it's not just the sweet taste. It may actually be the sensing mechanisms in the oral cavity for carbohydrate content, because they've used, like a non-nutritive sweetener drink compared to a carbohydrate drink. And in both cases, you don't swallow it. So you rinse your mouth out with like a mouthful of this, glucose water or like sucralose water, and you spit it out. And you do that multiple times throughout the session. And occasionally it seems to, result in slightly more volume performed during resistance training. But in most studies, it doesn't. So I think the effect, if it occurs, it's inconsistent. And when the effect is there, it is small at best. So that's an aspect of it. Another interesting thing, and this actually just was published by a study by Naharudin and colleagues that just came out in 2021. And this is actually really cool. So big shout out to Naharudin and colleagues. They have done 3 studies that have all built on one another. Like they're truly doing kind of like the scientific method of like, we have a question, we're going to assess it here. Okay, the questions that come out of that, we're going to assess it here, we're going to assess it here. So they've done 3 trials with resistance trained men doing a crossover. So they do both conditions. And in both cases, what they do is they have these trained dudes do 4 sets to failure at 90% of their 10 rep max. So probably, they're somewhere between their 12 to 15 rep max. So like a hypertrophy load on squats and bench. So 4 sets to failure squat, 4 sets to failure on bench. And they do that after going to sleep and then waking up in the morning and having different breakfasts, right? So they're looking at the effects of breakfast consumption on a morning workout, which I say that instead of just like pre-workout carbohydrate, because there is arguably a difference between not having eaten for 10 hours, having a meal and then training versus going, I ate breakfast, then I ate at lunch, and then I had like, a Gatorade before I trained at 4 p.m., or something like that. Yeah. So the after work crew or the during my lunch break crew may have different considerations than the morning crew. But if we're going to be talking about that morning position, that's what Naharudin has looked at. And the first study, they compared habitual breakfast consumers getting up and just having water versus having a like proper 500, 600 calorie breakfast meal predominantly based in carbohydrate. And they observed a significant effect where they performed more volume, I believe, on the squat and bench press in that study when they had breakfast, right? That was 2019. Now, depending on how you look at that, you'd be like, yep, you need to, if you had an overnight fast, you should eat something or it'll negatively affect your performance. Well, the question is does the fact that they're habitual breakfast consumers matter? Does the fact that you cannot placebo control that study matter? Like, you just had water, or you had breakfast, right? So is that the placebo of eating, or is it potentially the nocebo of not eating? Like that's actually having a negative effect on your performance because you're so used to eating. And then, what is the mechanism there? Let's say it is a positive effect of having breakfast. Is it, glucose availability? Is it a little bit of that glycogen replenishment that's happening? Or is it something akin to, the carbohydrate sensing in the mouth? Is it something related to, hunger or other central effect? Is it a psychological effect? We don't know. But again, to Naharudin's credit, then in 2020, they came back and they had they replicated the study exactly, same population, not the same subjects, but same population, so trained men. And they had 3 groups in the crossover. They had the water only, and then they had 2 different breakfast conditions. This time what they did is they kind of made like a mush. So they took like maltodextrin and orange flavoring and like xanthan gum, and just made kind of like this gross mush you'd eat, this orange flavored mush. But in one of them, it had like 100 plus grams of carbs, and in the other one, it was just a non-nutritive sweetener. So you had a placebo breakfast with like less than 20 calories versus a proper, again, 500 calorie carbohydrate dominant breakfast, but they were flavor and texture matched. So you didn't know whether you were actually consuming carbohydrates before training. And then they had the water only condition. So this controls for the effect of the potential nocebo or placebo effect of having a breakfast of some type or nothing. And then it also controls for the potential effect of, well, is there an additional additive effect on top of actually having carbohydrate, having glucose availability, potentially replenishing some glycogen from the overnight fast. And this is where it gets wild, is in that study in 2020, there was no significant difference in performance between the placebo breakfast and the actual carbohydrate breakfast, but both of them outperformed water only. So I think that's pretty wild. But then it gets even wilder. Omar, are you ready for the study that just came out, I think in December?
Breaking news. I'm ready. Absolutely, man. Go right ahead. Yeah.
All right. So this end of 2021 probably will be fully in press this year in 2022, but you can see it on PubMed. You can read the abstract. And I'll be reviewing it in mass coming up this next month. They then went, okay, so we see, like the conclusion from that last study that I just talked about was it seems to be a psychological or hunger-mediated effect. So they did measure hunger, and they found that both the placebo breakfast and the actual carbohydrate-based breakfast blunted hunger, right? They provided some satiety to a greater degree than water. Not surprising. Yeah. And they both improved performance. And of course, those two things could be correlated, but not causational. Hard to know. So then the question is, well, all right, so what is really going on here? Why is there an effect? It could be, psychological. It could be flavor sensing. It could be hunger and fullness. Who knows what's going on here, right? How do we separate an actual maybe centrally mediated effect of an effect on the brain from the placebo effect of having a breakfast? Okay. So the way they did that was, like I said, just a month ago in December. Now they repeated the study one more time, same methods, 4 sets to failure on squat and bench after an overnight fast and having 2 different breakfasts. This time, both groups had a carbohydrate-based breakfast, and they were equated. So same amount of total carbs. However, one group had just a liquid carbohydrate drink. We're talking just maltodextrin and water. And the other group had that mush. So now we're comparing different viscosities. So we have a semi-solid breakfast and we have a liquid breakfast. And we know that a viscous semi-solid breakfast is going to provide more fullness and satiety. And that's actually what they observed. However, this is what's cool. The semi-solid breakfast outperformed the liquid breakfast.
Really?
So after the semi-solid, viscous, more filling breakfast, the participants performed significantly more reps on the squat. Not the bench press, but the squat. And it's tough to know if that is that an actual order effect, because they always do squat before bench. Eventually it just kind of tapers off the effect. Yeah. Or is it a body part specific effect? Tough to say. Or is it just the variance, because we're looking at 16 participants and, maybe if we'd sampled another 16, we would have seen an effect on bench press. Hard to say. But the interesting thing is this seems to indicate that what you want to avoid with your pre-workout meal is being hungry, or too hungry rather, and that you want a sense of fullness. And that seems to actually have a physiological effect on performance to some degree. Maybe it's distracting, or maybe it actually limits performance to some degree. That has some kind of centrally mediated effect on fatigue. It's hard to say, but I think before we just then conclude this episode and go, look, just have whatever the hell you want, you just don't want to be hungry, is we have to look at these Naharudin studies and go, they're not low volume, but they're just 8 sets. It's 4 sets of bench, 4 sets of squats. They're about, a little less than, I think a little over an hour and a half long, the training sessions. So yeah, it's long and it's hard, 4 sets to failure on 2 compound movements, but it's certainly, does it represent a proper hypertrophy phase of a strength athlete, a trained one, especially, who's putting out a lot of, these guys are trained, but when you take a power lifter who actually competes, when they're doing hypertrophy work, the energy expenditure on a set of 8 is a lot. Yeah. You try to squat 405 for 8 when you weigh, 200 pounds or less. That is a lot of energy expenditure relative to your body weight, just to consider it. Yeah. And then you do 3 more exercises, you're in there for, like you were talking to Panna, he got 3-hour workouts. I think that's on the upper end of normal, but it's certainly not unheard of in higher volume phases for powerlifters to be working out 2 to 2.5 hours, 4 days a week, with 1 day a week being maybe a little less or 2. I've experienced that. And the question, I think it begs the question, well, what about higher volumes? And what about states where you're not coming off of a fast? And how do all these different variables impact things?
Eric, so here's my question for you. Question the first, the mush that actually had no calories in it. That had, did you say it was xanthan gum or something? It was a combination of things.
Yeah, so it's an orange squash, which is just not an actual squash like the vegetable. This is a thing in the UK, but it's basically this juice, this low calorie or no calorie kind of flavored mush, and then you either add non-nutritive sweetener or you add maltodextrin to it. Here's the thing though. This is kind of gross, right? The funny thing is that in that study in 2020, they rated water as more pleasant than this breakfast.
So that's Eric, that was basically the question I was going to get at, is that must have tasted terrible. And so for that to seemingly have an effect for whatever reason over water, because your eating experience of that, I've experienced that before. Let's say you have a terrible breakfast. This is a genuinely disgusting, no offense. It's supposed to be calorie free, so there's no way of making it taste pleasant, and you're eating this mush. You're not thinking, you eat, let's say, a hearty bowl of oatmeal or whatever you have, I'm either your satiety signals, whatever the case might be, you're eating food. You're eating this garbage. And even with this garbage in your belly, probably, maybe you're thinking about it, maybe you're not, your performance, whether you're aware of it or not, is superior than those that simply had nothing, or water. It blows my mind. Just because I'm thinking about that experience. I'm a finicky eater too. But just the act of eating garbage.
It seems that the hedonistic effect, how much you enjoyed the meal, is not at play here. Yeah. As far as the performance, and that's also I mentioned in the 2020 Naharudin study, where they enjoyed water more than they enjoyed the orange mush. That was also replicated in the one that just came out a month ago. So they rated the semi-solid viscous mush with carbohydrate as more filling but less pleasant than the liquid maltodextrin shake. Right. And I think it was a big difference, if I recall correctly. I think I have it right here, so let me just look at it real quick.
So there's no hedonic component, as you said. It's not this thing correct. Man, I'm eating this food, even if it's 0 calories, but it sure tastes good. Whatever I feel, they don't know how many calories it is, but they know what it tastes like, and it tastes terrible.
Yeah, it's not good. Yeah, that is. That is because what they do is they rate the fullness immediately after how filling it was immediately after taking it, and then they also rated the pleasantness immediately after taking it, and then they use what's called a visual analog scale, which is just basically it looks like a ruler on a piece of paper, and it's marked from 0 to 100, and you just mark with a pencil on a scale of 0 to 100 how filling was this, right, and then how pleasant was it. And then, to give better comparisons, what they did is multiple time points through the next, hour and a half, nearly 2-hour training session, they would ask you to rate hunger, fullness, and they actually did blood draws to look at things like ghrelin, PPY and things like that, other markers associated with hormonal markers associated with hunger and fullness. But anyway, I want to say, and I don't have it in front of me, I want to say like the pleasantness was like a 38 on a 0 to 100 scale on average for the semi-solid, and it was like 70 something for the liquid. Like, yeah, it's fine. It's just liquid.
Yeah. No, Eric, that's terribly low. Here's a quick question for you then. The implication, because you said they were, what, it's 4 sets to failure on squats, you said, and 4 sets to failure on the bench, and it took about an hour and a half?
I want to say it was a little over that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And that is, as you said, a solid workout. Again, taken to failure. These are reasonably trained individuals. What do you think, Eric, the implication would be if we extend the conversation to your point, either powerlifters, bodybuilders, those experienced intermediate lifters that have been training for a while, that some sessions, depending upon blocks, could be even longer than that? What do you think that would imply with what they've discovered thus far? Because you did say they noticed effect on squats. So it was like the first movement order. Second, when they got to the bench press, it didn't seem to produce anything. Could that also be the quantity, like where it's something, or also even the conversation? I think maybe we had it in another episode. The idea that was pre, but then the role potentially of like intra while you're training, and then what that could do.
Yeah, and honestly, this is where it gets murky, and it makes it. And this is why we thought it'd be really good to meta analyze this. And I can't get into the specifics, but I can tell you some of the variables that I do think matter.
Sure.
And that we have, at least non-peer reviewed at this point, indications that they do matter. So for one, most of the time when you're looking at these pre-workout or during workout carbohydrate feeding protocols in the research, there is a predetermined amount of fasting, right? So it could be like you typically see them categorized in 1 or 2, a short period. Like I want to make sure you haven't had a meal recently, like so 2 to 4 hours, don't eat anything, right? And this would be more akin to the people who train at lunch or people who train after work or whatever. And then there is the 8 hours or more, basically an overnight fast, where we want to see the effects of just like you're in a fasted state and what happens when we feed you different things. So that's one aspect, okay? Another aspect that can affect the outcomes of these studies, and it does seem to, is what are they looking at? Are they looking at a one-off expression of strength? And I mentioned earlier, those pretty consistently don't show an effect of pre-carbohydrate feeding. And anyone who's interested in that, it's pretty easy to look it up. You can look at studies by half that were done in colleagues in like the 2000s. And even before that, I want to say an aptly titled study by Fairchild and colleagues, glucose ingestion does not improve maximal isokinetic force. Boom. Right. Actually, that was 2016. But anyway, we got stuff from the 90s to the 2000s to the to modern, like the last 5 years, that all suggest if you're trying to enhance force or maximum strength, it's probably carbohydrate isn't going to do it. Okay. However, if we think about the total volume performed, and this can be expressed in different ways, the total number of maximal effort sets, there does seem to be a relationship there. Like when you look at studies where they do more total sets versus fewer, more often than not, when you see more total sets, those are the studies that lean more towards positive than neutral. And when we look at the length of these sessions, which is another proxy for volume, like when you look at sessions that are, closer to an hour, like longer than 45 minutes, versus those that are shorter. Once again, when you look at those longer resistance training sessions, you start to see that's where more of the positive findings lie. And then finally, when you start to see exercise, because often you will see studies where they do primarily upper or lower body exercises. Sometimes they'll do full body. And when you look at full body training sessions that include lower body exercises or lower body exercises primarily, again, that's where you see more positive findings. And when you think about this like a convergence of all this data together, what are we looking at? Okay, so if I've been fasted for longer, that means I probably have a lower energetic status, right? So muscle glycogen is primarily going to be depleted when you actually use that muscle, but not exclusively. Like we do have data to show, like if you eat a meal, you get some slightly higher levels of muscle glycogen, but you definitely will have lower levels of liver glycogen, which is pretty much and primarily dependent upon feeding. So longer fasting period, you got less endogenous stores of carbohydrate, which you can tap into quickly, okay? Longer training session or more sets. Okay, greater metabolic output, pretty straightforward. Okay, then finally, lower body exercises versus upper body. It's nothing magic about the quadriceps, but that's like 60% versus 40% of the muscles in your body, lower versus upper, respectively. So ultimately, it comes down to, unsurprisingly, like, what are the energetic demands? And the more energetic demands and the less energy you have available, kind of starting off that session, quote unquote, the more likely you are to get a better outcome if you were to consume carbohydrate before training or potentially during training, like you were saying, Omar.
Yeah.
Now, the question is that an ergogenic effect, or are we simply preventing an ergolytic effect? You know? And I think that is an important distinction as well, is that, and for those who haven't heard the term ergolytic, I know it's not used as commonly, but that's basically the opposite of ergogenic. It has a negative, it's a performance decrement. So being fasted for more than 8 hours and then trying to do a maximal effort, multiple set, lower body and upper body session in the fasted state, consuming only water, is that your real baseline performance, or is the natural state of a person to actually have some food in them? So you could argue that you're rescuing, quote unquote, performance by having carbohydrate in that state. But nonetheless, it's very difficult to parse that out when you look at research. You're looking at two different groups, you're comparing the means, and you're saying, are they different? And when a lot of those conditions converge, that's when you more often than not observe in studies where there's a positive effect of feeding, having carbohydrate before or like during training, like you said. So that's unsurprising, because the data that is very clear, Omar, what we have meta-analyses existing already on, is like the effect of pre-cycling endurance training carbohydrate feeding, which does have a notable effect on performance. So like, if we know that carbohydrate is the fuel source that can enhance performance, there has to be at some point, or you would think logically that there is some point at which you would likely have an effect on resistance training. And the more energetically demanding the resistance training is, that's when it seems it probably has an effect. So I think that's interesting, because that seems to indicate that potentially, if we go back to those 3 Naha-ridden studies I talked about, where we drilled down to the final conclusion being, you know what? It seems like you just don't want to be hungry. You want to eat something so that you're probably having that centrally mediated effect that enhances performance. When you look at the overall body of literature, when you're sometimes seeing people do far more sets than just 8, for example, that is when you go, well, hold the phone. Like, there are studies out there where people are doing twice that number. There's studies where they do 4 sets, 8, 12. There's studies with the 16 sets. And if there seems to be this relationship between the total amount of work done, then is there a different primary mechanism of action by which carbohydrate enhances performance for lower and moderate volume studies versus those higher volume studies? And the answer is potentially, or we'd see this kind of flat outcome to where it didn't really matter how much you did. It's always that hunger and fullness mediated effect. So I think that's interesting, because there is a time course. So the big fallacy, and kind of where we were like in the 90s, we understood the energetics. We understood that resistance training heavily drew on muscle glycogen. If you look at studies on how much muscle glycogen is depleted, you see between typically 20 to 40%. That might not sound like a lot, but you start to get knock-on effects of fatigue with even moderate amounts of muscle glycogen depletion. And more importantly, that's total muscle glycogen depletion. There was a recent study that was published where they looked at selective locations of muscle glycogen depletion. And they found that specifically the intramyofibular type 2 fibers, they can be depleted almost to like 70% compared to the overall muscle. So the ones you're actually using for these high intensity contractions are quite depleted after even a moderate volume, not to failure kind of powerlifting style program. So like the study they used, or the protocol they used, was like 4x5 of deficit deadlifts, 4x5 of squats, and then 3x12 of split squats. That's a really kind of like, no one would be surprised if you did that in a powerlifting gym kind of deal. But you wouldn't think like, oh man, that's heavily going to deplete my muscle glycogen. And it doesn't overall, but it does of the fibers that are actually involved in the location where they access it the most. So anyway, what I'm getting at is that fuel availability is not the primary concern until it is. But it is plausible, depending on the discipline, the phase, and the type of training that you need individually, that it could be with different length training and different phases of training. So it's one of those things where you will probably get a benefit or prevent a decrement in performance from having almost anything if we're talking low to moderate volume, and it's not going to be that crazy of an effect. We look at these Naharudin studies, there's like a 10 to 15% difference in the total volume performed on squats, and then less than that on bench. Like I said, in that most recent study, there was no difference, and others maybe it's like 5%. So yeah, maybe the initial aspects of that training session will be more negatively or less negatively affected depending on if you have that meal, but the composition of the meal, not as important. But if that then goes from 4 sets of squats and 4 sets to bench to, all right, sweet, let me get my RDLs in, and then I'm going to do, some upper body accessories, and then I'm going to go home, that's when you actually might want to think about making sure that meal does contain carbohydrate as you go into it.
Eric, I'm about to become the biggest disciple here of the neutral to positive approach. Before I go on, I do want to say, what is ergogenic? Well, of course, watching Stuck Together. Listening to Iron Culture, it provides a clear boost in testosterone. Doesn't matter who you are. I've witnessed dogs grow more chest hair listening to Iron Culture. What produces an ergolytic effect, on the other hand, is attempting to sue us. So I just want to get back to that tandem squat. If you thought that you misunderstood and you thought you could misconstrue what we said, like, oh, I'm going to do the squat and it's time to get a payday because guess what? They own the pyramids. You're in for a rude awakening. I do want to say, Eric, the serious question, though, because we're talking about, what type of training are you doing? What is the purpose? What would be the potential downside, if at all, for a lifting enthusiast that is either, let's say a powerlifter or a bodybuilder, someone who is a recreational lifter, but is probably doing more than just a few sets, and is performance oriented, of consuming carbohydrates either pre or intra during the workout, either meme like, such as the Sour Patch Kids, or just in general making sure that, okay, within this window, I'm just consuming something. What are there any conceivable, because we've established this minor, neutral positive, that's why I'm joking, but is there anything you could think of besides maybe for some people with like me, something like finicky, like deadlifts, anything in the stomach, a slight discomfort? Is there anything that's a downside before, it just seems like an overall, like, oh yeah, not a bad idea?
Absolutely. And this is actually reasonably well documented in the endurance training literature. Yeah. But less in the literature, like the actual measured effects, but more in like the discussions, and especially in anecdotes among actual endurance athletes. And that is gastrointestinal distress. Yeah. And more studies, modern studies, are reporting this. Because one of the issues is that in peer-reviewed research, or even if it's not peer-reviewed, like if someone drops out of the study or doesn't complete the protocol, they don't get included. So there is potentially a little bit of survivorship bias going on here, where if someone is like, oh man, I have diarrhea, I got to get off this treadmill real quick. Right. And like serious endurance athletes, all of them have stories of having to urinate or potentially defecate mid-race. Yeah, for real. And that's just like, that's just, you think we're hardcore? They're hardcore too, and that can be exacerbated by trying to get in as much carbohydrate as possible. And for someone who is doing a marathon or a triathlon or is doing an ultra marathon, one of the rate limiting steps for performance is simply substrate availability. Yeah. So they're literally trying to figure out in the endurance training space, when you look at feeding protocols, what is the most we can get absorbed and actually available and replenish glycogen. And that's why they're walking around strapped up with like goo, they've got just maltodextrin gel, sports drinks, and every station stop you can get Gatorade, all that stuff. So in those scenarios, when you're trying to push that level of carbohydrate through the system, gastrointestinal distress, it's not a question of whether you get it or not. It's to what degree and does it cause a problem? And then you want to take it as far as you can without having that crop up, because that can have an ergolytic effect. So theoretically, you could have that same problem with resistance training. And I think this is where you really want to not have the more is better kind of default setting that a lot of lifters do. I have definitely seen people go, well, hey, if there is a potential effect of carbohydrates on performance, then I'm going to have as much as I can stomach before training. But I will tell you this, and this is, I think, really important for those listening. You can look at all these various variables that seem to influence whether or not you'll get a positive effect of pre-workout carbohydrate feeding on resistance training performance. One of them where there isn't consistency in the literature and there doesn't seem to be a relationship is the carbohydrate dose. So that's important. Yeah. So you can find studies where they've taken everything as low as like 0.4 grams per kg of body mass pre-workout. So let's say you're a 220 pound male, just because that makes math easy. That's 100 kilos. Yep. That's only 40 grams of carbohydrate before training. That's not much. That's like 2 big pieces of bread, right? Okay. And then all the way up to over 2 grams per kg. So that's, 5 times that amount. Okay. So that's like 200 grams of carbohydrate and then training, within 1 to 2 hours later. Okay. And there is no relationship that I can see, at least in terms of like, if you just kind of qualitatively look at like the various studies across the spectrum of this dosage intake, it doesn't seem dose dependent as to why it affects resistance training. And that's because the level of muscle glycogen depletion you're going into it is going to be slight. Liver glycogen is a proportionately small amount of your overall glycogen availability. Fullness is not necessarily dependent upon the carbohydrate dose. We just talked about the Naharudin study. You felt just as full consuming 20 calories as they did 400 from this gross slush. That really has more to do, at least in the acute sense, like in the next hour or two while you're training, with just simply the viscosity of it and what was in your stomach beforehand, etc. So like if we're thinking about kind of that short-term performance enhancement for resistance training of ensuring fullness, not carbohydrate dependent, and if we're thinking about long-term where carbohydrate does matter, you just don't need that much compared to endurance training. So I would caution people to not see what they can get away with. But if anything, lean on the other side of the equation, Like I can't tell you how many times, and I think this is where we could dovetail into intermittent fasting. Yeah. I've talked to people who go, I used to eat a big pre-workout meal. I'd be an hour out and I would have my lunch and be like, oh, what was that? Like, 150 grams of carbs, 50 grams of protein, 10 grams of fat. I'm like, oh shit. Okay. That's like a lot of food, bro. Yeah. That's like almost 1,000 calories. Okay. But then I switched to intermittent fasting and I would train just after having a cup of black coffee and my performance improved. And my first thought is always, well, you went from having a ridiculously high amount of food and then trying to go train to nothing. Yeah. I think you were actually getting a ergolytic effect from what you're doing previously. Yeah. But there's a whole like mess of intermediate categories between 0 calories and 1,000, man. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I've taken people and I've gone, how about just a scoop of whey and a banana? Yeah. And now they actually find that that's a little better. They have coffee plus a banana and some whey, or something like that. And I have always found that I perform best with something in my stomach, but like nothing that is distracting or that is difficult, Like the Pop-Tart era was good for this. People just grab one Pop-Tart. It's like 40 grams of carbs and nothing else. I personally really don't like to have a full stomach going into training. And I think not all, because I definitely talked to some people who do like that. Like they like the way their belt fits snugly. Most of the time, though, they're not doing high rep sets to failure. Yeah. But if you're going to be doing like high rep sets of squats and leg press or lunges, do not have like 2 Big Macs before you go into the gym. Like that's asking to have some nasty moments in the bathroom. Oh. So yeah, Omar, to answer your question in more brief terms, I don't think you need much pre-training, and having too much, you don't have any potential upside, but there is a potential downside if we were to extrapolate from the endurance training research.
No, Eric, that makes a ton of sense. And before we get into that conversation, a very interesting study on time-restricted feeding, I do want to say I oscillated between being that bro over a decade ago where I would slam that maltodextrin, an absurd amount, like probably whatever, let's say 100 grams, intra training, so I have a little bit before, sloshing in my stomach on the bus over to the gym, drinking it during. Wasn't the taste, it was absurdly bad because guess what? It was chunky. Blender bottles weren't a thing. And it was an overall negative experience. Then I flipped over to basically having nothing, training on an empty stomach. And then recently, I don't know if you remember, Eric, but shout out to Ben Escrow. When we trained in 2018, I was having some gastrointestinal distress when I was deadlifting. I'm like, oh man, it feels like I got to like kind of puke. And he actually identified it because I thought it was okay, like whatever. I'm the type of person, just some water and maybe like a Gatorade, or I like coconut water, cool, whatever. And it actually turned out, interesting enough, and some people might experience this, because the pre-workout that I was using, my pre-workout had citrulline malate, but it had a high enough dose of that malic acid just on the stomach, the 8 grams, that was a thing that was finicky on my stomach. And after I kind of removed that, and Ben was like, yeah, check it out. And that's why on Elementals pre-workout, we subbed out, we put in, because guess what? I want to consume my own shit. Citrulline, just L-citrulline, no, malate in there. Boom. Then I slammed back in just like a coconut water or a Gatorade. But I was that guy that for a long time, a heavy dose, and I was used to basically, Eric, a certain level of discomfort came in quotations with the territory with that. Oh, bro, like, lifters, a little discomfort for more gains. Why not? Right. For improved performance, to like basically nothing, because I'm like, oh, my stomach, to reincorporating. So totally, man. I see you on that 100%.
No, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where sometimes bodybuilders, like we've talked about this, and certain lifters feel like it's supposed to be hard, it's supposed to hurt, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. Yeah. I'll drink blood if it'll make me get bigger. And
no, dude.
Sometimes it's like, yeah, we do what's necessary, but we don't do hard things just because they're hard.
Yes.
And drinking blood might, or the equivalent of whatever we're talking about, might actually be counterproductive. Yeah. So like, stop eating 200 grams of carbs right before you train, with only 30 minutes to get it in your system. So it is a question of, what is best, not what is theoretically best. And this is where you actually have to pay attention to your body and see how you respond. And if you look at most of the feeding strategies of elite endurance athletes, it is individualized. They figure out what their gut tolerance is. Yeah. And I think it should be the same way here.
Eric, that is the perfect segue, because we're talking about, pre, intra, post workout nutrition here. We're talking about the role of carbohydrates. I understand, it's hot off the presses, it's coming up, it just got released in master, or it's going to be what we're talking about, intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding, comparing a year-long study with some pretty interesting findings.
Yeah, man. So if you're going to talk about peri-workout feeding and the fasting window and all this stuff, or pre-workout feeding, it's inevitable that you will have to address folks who, like the example I just gave, and this has been numerous times. Hey, I used to eat pre-training, and now I go into it fasted. I haven't eaten since 8 or 9 p.m. the night prior. I just have coffee, and my performance improved. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of anecdotes out there. So, and there's a lot of people who feel they benefit from time restricted feeding. So I think it would be a lack of due diligence to not address time restricted feeding when you start talking about peri-workout feeding as well, because they often conflict the recommendations for doing one versus the other. Yep. Now, so IF, as they call it on the internet, the typical 16-8 protocol, where you're not eating for 16 hours and you eat for 8 hours, is what's called time restricted feeding in the literature. And it has taken a while before the research has caught up with the level of popularity expressed in the fitness community. So I want to say, there's been a lot of different people who have done it, but probably the most popularized form is what Martin Birkin has been talking about in the early 2000s to now, and many people have kind of taken up that same mantle. For what it's worth, anecdotally, it seems to be highly popular in males in their 20s. That's just something I've observed.
Eric, why? They're too busy grind time, prime time. Getting after that grindpreneur mindset where they don't have time to eat. So shout out to all the homies.
Or they wake up at noon anyway, so waiting an hour till 1 really doesn't make a difference.
So, boom. Well, hey, bro, when you're your own CEO,
old man shot at all you youngins. You like that?
When you're your own CEO, you can wake up whenever you want. Also, I'm mining this crypto. Be right back. It's like you're doing what?
Yeah, I mean, is it really like a fasting or feeding window if you're only awake for 8 hours of the day? I mean, I don't know. So, all right, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm just taking shots. I was once in my 20s. It was a long time ago. I don't remember what it was like, but no, in all seriousness, there definitely seems to be a lot of people who benefit from time restricted feeding,
Yep.
and I've always been curious about it because I've definitely had some clients who have tried it and done well with it. But now what's interesting is that, and don't forget, folks, we did have a really great episode where we had Grant Tinsley and also Danny Lennon talk about this. Cody Hahn was on as well,
Yes.
although he didn't really touch on the aspects of time restricted feeding. But Tinsley and his colleagues and others have done a lot of research in this area. And Danny has done a great job communicating some of the science around circadian rhythm. So the typical 16-8 time restricted feeding window often is like, you start eating at 1 and then you finish it at 9 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's that 8-hour window. However, the data, although it's not a huge effect, I'll try to summarize it really briefly because it's not on the topic of what we're going to talk about. Yeah. And Danny covered it quite well in that episode, so check it out. There does seem to be health benefits to having a shorter feeding window within a day. And it doesn't need to be 8 hours, even if like you're currently eating in a 14-hour window and you go to 12 or 10, which I would say is still pretty normal. I guess it's time restricted for you, but there's a lot of people who just habitually eat in a 10-hour window without trying, They don't eat after dinner, and you're basically there. Eat a slightly late breakfast. If you get up at 6 and you eat at 8, and then you have dinner at 7, that's an 11-hour feeding window. That would be better than, say, a 14-hour window in terms of metabolic health markers. Okay, so the data would suggest that actually, if you were going to choose between either a feeding window that is early shifted or late shifted, that it would probably be a little bit better for health to have it early shifted, so you don't eat after dinner, basically. You have a breakfast right when you wake up, you have an early-ish dinner around, say, 6, and then the last 4 hours you don't eat. That might have some positive benefits on sleep and might have some positive metabolic effects. Again, this is for health, and this has largely been studied in people who are not necessarily healthy at the start of it. So, the translation of these effects to resistance-trained athletes, not very much. And importantly, on the hierarchy of going from no feeding window at all, like just eating while you're awake, to a time restricted window, to an early shifted time restricted window, each one of those is better than no feeding window at all. So it's like slightly more positive than already positive. So it's not like you're doing something wrong or worse if you're doing the traditional quote unquote, the Martin Birkin-esque start with a late lunch or have breakfast at lunch, basically skip breakfast protocol. So anyway, with that kind of health stuff stated, and if you want further details, definitely check out some of Danny's content. Let's talk about what do people in the IF community typically do, and then what is the research looked at, and what does the research suggest might be the best approach. So in the IF community, often there is maybe not a pre-workout meal at all. Like I said, just a pre or a cup of coffee, or it's very, very small, like a banana and whey type of deal, and then they get into it. And often in the 8-hour feeding window, there's only 2 meals. Sometimes there's 3, but it might just be like a scoop of whey after the workout or something like that. So it's like these 2 very big meals. That's probably the most common iteration. And often the feeding period will start after the workout. Okay. So you wake up, you do your thing, you train, and then you eat for the rest of the day in that post-workout anabolic phase, and there's some hype that is inaccurate around this. Now, when we look at the research, it has been built upon over the last 5 or 6 years, primarily kind of trying to look at this in healthy resistance-trained individuals for the purposes of enhancing performance and body composition. Big part of this charge led by Tinsley. Shout out to Grant. And they have slowly kind of nailed down what we think are probably the best practice protocols if you want to use an intermittent fasting approach. So back in, I want to say like 2016 or 2017, Tinsley did a study where they had a 4-hour feeding window and a 20-hour fasting window. And that actually had some pretty lackluster results in terms of performance. Like it had I wouldn't want to do that. Like that had relatively negative effects in terms of upper body, and as far as body composition changes. And unsurprisingly, it was difficult to eat enough food with just a 4-hour window. And that's kind of one of the biggest critiques of IF for time restricted feeding. Of any effect is just down to the fact that they can't eat as much food in that area. That's why metabolic health is benefited, or that's why they lose body fat. And it may just be that, but maybe not. And we're going to get into that in a second, Omar. But overall, when you look at the data, we start to see better outcomes when the feeding window is not too short. So following up on that 4-hour feeding window study, there's been more. So there was a study by, I believe, Morrow and colleagues that was done a few years earlier, or a few years later, that was with an 8-hour feeding window, again, kind of replicating the more popular IF protocol. And then Tinsley in 2019 also did a similar protocol, but in resistance-trained women. So in both cases, they had overall positive effects. Basically they said, hey, this works pretty well. It wasn't outperformed by the comparative group on the quote unquote normal diet. And in both cases, they did some things that are pretty interesting. And I think both were eight weeks long. Maybe one was 10 weeks. I can't quite remember. But they had sufficient protein intake. So we're talking at least 1.6 grams per kg of protein. They also trained in the fed state. So they ate, and then they trained shortly after that, ate, and then ate again. So they had 3 meals in the 8-hour period. So they're relatively tightly packed, but it's still 3 meals. So they had more opportunities to get protein in. They had decent protein spread, at least while they were eating. They trained in the fed state, and they had post-workout protein. And that is a hallmark of the studies when we look at the research where IF performs better. So that's kind of where we were until just recently, where Morrow then did another follow-up study, which came out, I want to say in December. I could be wrong, but it came out just at the end of 2021. So I think December. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, you can find it. It's titled 12 Months of Time-Restricted Eating and Resistance Training Improves Inflammatory Markers and Cardiometabolic Risk Factors. And you heard that right, Omar. 12 months.
A year.
So this is really, yeah. So like I said, the IF crowd has been, if people stuck with it, which is, not an assumption we can make for anything in fitness, but there are presumably some people who've been IFing now for maybe 15 years,
Yeah. Yeah.
If they really stuck with it.
They're still in their 20s, Eric. It's amazing.
Amazing. Yeah, it actually not only is it a viable option as far as your feeding schedule for body composition changes and strength, but it will also halt aging completely. Whew,
Eric,
tell you what.
Real quick, because, bro, you're on fire. But it is amazing how people will obviously extrapolate certain things and make just bold, not even down tenuous claims, but outright false. But the whole, the buzzword by not intermittent, but
autophagy.
Yes. And hormesis, where it's
macrophages.
It's like, oh, okay, guys, just slow your roll here. Just stop.
The best part is you should just ask the people who say that, to really explain it to you in detail.
Eric, you'd be such a shit to start. You actually would have a lit YouTube channel if you just at first you start within your field of expertise, but I think with your critical thinking, you could neatly just start slowly expanding beyond that, just to really ask questions, pointed questions. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Autophagy. Yeah, no, explain that. Okay, so that means go, and then by minute, it's spot the minute where the person realizes they don't know what they're talking about. Is it minute 10? Is it minute 15? Is it minute 3? I'm
going to name that YouTube channel Sith Socrates.
Hey, that's a golden. Anyways, I'm going to say don't do this. This is what described the nutrition field of evidence-based practitioners for the last 15 years. Sure.
Being assholes. So let's not. We had that. Yeah. We did it. It didn't go well.
Sorry, Eric. Year-long study. Boom,
yes.
December.
Okay.
Morrow.
So Morrow and colleagues, 2021, 12 months of time-restricted eating. And this, I think, is really interesting because they took the same study they did in 2019, and at the 8-week mark, they asked all those dudes, hey, do you want to keep going for another 10 months? And a fair number of them said, yeah, sure, wow. we'll do it. And again, they had some key aspects to it. So in this, they were consuming, I think, 1.8 to 1.9 grams per kg of protein, so just shy of a gram per pound, definitely in the range of what we know to be optimal, quote unquote, for maximizing muscle mass. They ate at 1 p.m. They had their quote unquote breakfast. They had a 4 p.m. lunch, and then they had an 8 p.m. dinner. So they ate in that window, and they trained at some point between 4 to 6 p.m. And then after the training session, they had whey with water. Okay. So the 3 meals, again, 3 opportunities to get in protein, 4 if we're counting the days where they trained, which they trained, I believe, 3 or 4 days a week. And they train in the fed state. So those are things that in some cases differ a little bit from what is done by the folks anecdotally, but that is what has been shown to probably be better compared to other options for time-restricted feeding if we just look at the literature. Now, we don't have robust comparisons between different training protocols within IF, but it meshes nicely with what we know about protein feeding and spacing and trying to optimize that. So overall, that's pretty cool. But here's the thing. When we look at that Morrow 2019 study for just the first 8 weeks of this, there was no significant differences between the normal diet group that ate at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 8 p.m. with a 4 to 6 p.m. training period way afterwards, in terms of body composition or in terms of performance. And the metabolic markers were slightly better, and the time-restricted feeding group lost a little bit of body fat. So when you look at that 8-week study by Morrow, if you're a fan of IF, it's a big win, right? Basically, better body composition outcomes, no significant differences for hypertrophy, right? No significant differences for performance. So it's just great. It magically makes me lean. Yeah. Now, the funny thing is when you look at the discussion in that 2019 Morrow paper, they say, hey, we don't think this was caused by differences in caloric intake because when we did our 7-day food recalls with these folks, there weren't significant differences between them. We didn't see a decrease in food intake. But when you look at the actual body composition changes, the amount of body fat that was lost in the time-restricted eating group means that at least on average at the group level, it would be physically impossible for them not to have been in a slight deficit for that time period. Yeah. It's just a matter of what's the energetic composition of body fat and how did it go away, based on how much lean body mass they gained. They were in a net deficit overall. And why does this conflict with the self-report data? Well, because self-report data is inherently noisy. It only has about maybe 20, 30% shared variance with objective markers of nutrient status, like when we look at things like doubly labeled water, et cetera. So it is reliable enough at the group level for us to understand the nutritional habits of people. But if we're talking about how do we explain, 2 kilos of fat mass change over an 8-week period, which is pretty small, it's certainly not sensitive enough. So if we want to have the best data to understand whether someone was in a surplus or a deficit, we should actually be looking at body composition changes. And when you look at the body composition changes in that 2019 8-week first stage of the 12-month study, we go, oh, they were actually in a small deficit. And that seems to be what continued into the year-long study and with negative repercussions. So again, we look at the 8-week study, it looks like a clear win if you kind of do the surface level examination for IF. Lose some body fat, gain just as much strength and muscle mass. Why aren't you skipping breakfast, you fools, right? However, when we look at the year-long study, now we start to see some differences. There's actually a reduction in lean body mass in the intermittent fasting group, or the time-restricted eating group, I should say. And in their assessments of hypertrophy, they estimated the cross-sectional area in the arms and the legs. That went down as well, while those values went up for the normal diet group. So over this full year, the normal diet group, again, eating at 8, 1, and 8 again, they gained lean body mass, and they increased their cross-sectional area to a greater degree than the time-restricted eating group. So if you're anti-IF, this is your study. While if you're pro-IF, the 8-week one is your study. And you can be like, look, it's magic. You lose body fat. And this one, no, it's terrible. You lose muscle mass. It just happens. But in reality, again, what you see is when you look at the self-report data, now it actually does pop up. When you've got a full year, yes, there are some time points now where you see a reduction in caloric intake in the time-restricted eating group, even in the self-report, but it doesn't match up with how much body fat was lost. So again, if we look at what is probably the most reflective of true energetic status, whether they were in a deficit or a surplus, we see that they were in a small deficit. And it's nothing big. That's also something. Like we're talking like a 400-calorie deficit per month at certain times, not much. If in a full year, you only lose a couple of kilos of fat mass, it's not a big deficit at any given time point. Yeah. It just means that it's kind of like making it harder for you to get into a surplus. So yeah, the actual outcomes for those, just to give some straight up objective data, for the time restricted eating group, their fat-free mass went from like 73.4 down to like 72.2. So it was really like no significant change in fat-free mass for the time-restricted eating group. However, the arm muscle cross-sectional area and the thigh cross-sectional area did decrease. by, I think, like 2 centimeters squared and like 5 centimeters squared. However, fat-free mass in the normal diet group, it went up by 2 kilos over a couple of years, and their arm cross-sectional area increased by the same numbers, like 4 centimeters squared in the arm and right around, I think, 8 in the leg. So we're seeing a clear trend of slow muscle gain in the normal diet group, while we're seeing, at best, a lack of muscle gain in the time-restricted eating group. Like the decrements were there, but they were small. And this isn't like MRI. We're talking about estimations here. In terms of performance, though, like leg press, bench press, no significant differences between groups. So, it's not all bad. It's certainly like they lost some body fat and maintained muscle mass and strength for the most part. I don't think they visibly noticed any muscle mass loss. So we're talking about these kind of small changes.
Yeah.
But the fat mass losses were not huge. They lost basically 1.7 kilograms of fat mass in a year. So it's like they kind of just hit pause, Yes, their metabolic markers improved, but you would expect that if you compare a group that's slowly losing body fat in a slight deficit compared to a group that's slowly gaining muscle mass in a slight surplus. And importantly, the normal diet group really didn't gain any body fat. They went from like 10.4 to 10.5, kilograms of fat mass on their body. So that's not really, basically they had a really lean bulk and a slow increase in muscle mass over that time period.
Eric, you know me. Our relationship. I can misinterpret anything. I think using the principle of charity, which is having the most charitable interpretation of data, what an IF warrior could say is, look, these guys were getting shredded without even trying. Like they were supposed to eat a certain
100%.
amount of calories, and unintentionally, due to it being self-reported, they were in a deficit without even feeling like they were in a deficit. They got leaner without trying. That's the headline right there. If you want the IF headline, so it's like, how do we misconstrue this in our favor? They got leaner without trying! Exclamation point.
Well, there are, and I think that's, let's do that. Let's both strawman this and steelman this, depending on the position you want. Okay. So if you are anti-IF and you think, listen, every IFBB pro eats 6 meals a day, they get a middle of the night to eat, they are, just behemoths of eating. That's the only way to get huge. And that's what athletes have to do. You're a fool. Quit. You've developed an eating disorder, and then you created the whole eating way out of that. Like you're obsessed with having abs and you don't even have any muscle mass. I hate you turds. Like if that's the person we're talking about, again, that's not my position.
I wish I could be that person.
I've definitely seen that on the forums over the years, right? Yeah. That person is going to look at this and say, wait a minute, you're telling me this very, very, very slight deficit to where they only lost less than 2 kilos of fat mass over a year, resulted in muscle loss. Like they're seeing decreases in cross-sectional area. Like, what about your body recomposition episode, Iron Culture? I thought you could lose slight amounts of fat mass and gain muscle. This is clearly not just effect of a deficit. There's something inherently wrong with time-restricted eating. You're in a 10-calorie deficit per day? Like, BS, It's a little more than that. But the point being, you could make an argument of saying, you know what, in trained individuals they're not super high or super low in body fat, you would think over a year they'd be able to do some recomping, but they couldn't, and it's because of IF's fault. That is the straw man.
Sure.
If you want to do the steel man position, if you're like all super pro IF, it's exactly what you said. But I think the reality is that we have to consider both.
Yeah.
And to some degree, they can both be true. So I think this is better to look at this instead of like, do I need to be pro or anti time restricted feeding? But instead looking at it as, how do I get a tool for my tool belt out of this paper? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer here is, well, okay, if you're at a point where your main goal is to arrest fat gain, maybe get a little bit leaner, maintain a lean physique, and not have to worry about tracking macros or feeling like you're on a diet, it might be worth trying intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding. If you do it right, consume enough protein, I'd say try to get in 3 meals in the 8-hour window, train in the fed state, have post-workout protein. That's not a bad idea at all. And the data would bear that out, that worst case scenario, you're probably going to see kind of like neutral, maybe like very slight decrements in muscle mass, which I don't think will continue. No. Like, I don't think you're just going to slowly atrophy into nothing. But you will probably, at the very least, maintain your current level of leanness, if not get a little bit leaner.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of the IF data kind of looks like, you know? And if your goal is to get bigger, it's not a good fit because you're probably going to unintentionally get into a deficit. But I think in the modern era, and we've talked about how challenging and how hard it is. Like if you go back and listen to our episode with Dr. Ben House and Dr. Gabrielle Fendero, and then our follow-up with Dr. Spencer Nudolsky, man, it's hard to lose substantial amounts of body fat. And even just arresting weight gain is a huge boon for anybody. That's an asset. So if this is a tool that can do that, why not put it in your tool belt?
Yeah. Yeah. No, Eric, I do think there's a time and place for everything. And like we joked about those like 20-something-year-olds where it's like there's a high propensity of them that tend to be doing this. Like, cool. Time and place for everything, right? And I do think experimenting to the point, if one has never tried it before, then you simply don't know for your own self what the potential benefit or drawback could be with said approach. I found for myself already my overall hunger levels, I'd say, are slightly below average. And so when I tried that, like I would have essentially been the consequence of me trying it for a year. And once again, let's say, you know, self-reporting, not necessarily tracking, but just going by satiety signals, I would be losing weight, right? Using IF. And that could be a valuable tool theoretically if, as you said, like that, I think that was a great way of like summarizing some of the utility. And that's a tool in the tool belt. Oh, like my life suddenly has gotten busy. Guess what? Like my dreams, my aspirations of whatever, like hitting PRs or like getting yucky, actually making progress in the gym has to take a step back. I'm looking for something that's, I'm not going to say effortless because that's a little too gimmicky, but something that requires less effort on my part to regulate. And it could kind of just run itself. Oh, maybe I'd consider that. So it is interesting. Like it was funny to both steelman and strawman the argument, where I think that's kind of the fitness industry in a nutshell, where everyone's having different conversations about the same thing. And there's validity on most sides of the argument, but it depends upon the context and the person that we're talking about and the situation, which is kind of the case in all forms. But yeah, I am glad overall the position, like I said, like shout out to a massive monthly application, Strength Sports. I'll link it in the description for this episode, where I think the overall conversation is moving inevitably forward, where you spoke about, like I was there too, man, 2014 or whatnot. Of course, it's a new thing, like intermittent fasting, the over-reporting of its perceived benefits and the people jumping on top of it. But it is always cool to have a re-examination after the proverbial dust has settled, kind of like with carbohydrates and now with IF. Like, okay, like when can this work and what is the utility of this, you know?
Well said. Yeah. And I think it's just always important to remember that the anecdotes are the people who are going to be taking the time to get on Reddit and be like, this was awesome,
right,
are the people who had the best experience. Right. They don't necessarily reflect the average experience, the most likely experience. They have a solid possibility, I'm not saying they definitely are, of being a vocal minority. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's why you just have to be careful. I think anecdotes are very useful if you have a decent kind of cross-section of the population to look at. So for example, my anecdotes, the anecdotal impression I would get of IF just getting online versus say all the times I've tried it with clients are different, you know, because I've had divergent, polar opposite responses for different people on the two. Some people just never adapt and are just constantly hungry in the morning, and it leads them towards actually overcompensating in the feeding window and feeling like they're binge eating. I've definitely had people experience that. On the other side, I've had people experience what you probably would, Omar, and that's, it leads me to a deficit. I don't really have to try or track calories, and that can be a useful tool. And at the same time, that's not a great tool if you're trying to get jacked. Yeah. So anyway, I think we covered a lot of ground there. We started with, what to eat, how much, when, and why in terms of carbohydrate to enhance different types of resistance training performance. We covered some really interesting studies by the Naharudin group that kind of show that the mechanisms are not quite what we'd expect if we're focused on kind of the metabolic aspect of it. But overall, looking at the literature, maybe they are if you're doing longer training sessions with higher volume, including full body exercises, etc. Maybe that does become important, but that the dose is not a huge component or necessity. So don't just stuff yourself. And then we went, okay, well, what about the folks who are trying not to stuff themselves before training at all? And how does that dovetail into intermittent fasting? So I think we covered a lot of ground. We updated folks. And if you were to listen to this episode, in addition to the protein episode, as well as the roundtable we did with Dr. Cody Hahn, Dr. Grant Tinsley, and our man, Danny Lennon, then you will understand all of the Peri-Workout knowledge there is and manipulations of when you eat things.
D. Lennon. No, Eric, very well done, my man. I think it's another episode where, guess what? We had 3 topics, folks, to cover today, but we're going to wrap it up. Topic the first, as Eric said, Periworkout Nutrition, the role of carbohydrates. Topic the second, intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding. Topic the third, Eric posing, me critiquing and admiring. And it looks like, unfortunately, because we try and keep these about 90 minutes long, I think Eric, so I saw what you did, okay? What is it, a filibuster? Where
I was just counting the clock now.
Yeah. At the very start, like we reversed roles basically, where usually I derail things intentionally. And I'm like, all right, man, let's get to the topic I started. And then out of nowhere, Eric just starts derailing it because I know you're sweating down that clock to get us to the time. You're like, man, I'm not doing this pose.
Is it snowing outside?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what?
Well, I gotta keep my pants on.
I'm like, you have never brought up my background before. Like, oh, it's snowing outside. Oh, is that a sunny day? I bet that's nice outside. I'm like, Eric, what? What a smart guy. Well, sir. This guy's slick. Anyways, what another fantastic episode. We're off to a roaring start, the Roaring 20s 2022. Go ahead, leave a comment below. Leave a comment for different episode ideas, maybe for the dedicated Iron Cult listener who's been here, because there are people like I would say, while we're gaining new listeners, there is that large contingent, Eric, that like hopped on season 1 and they've been with us for experienced ones. And we have no problem revisiting particular topics. But if there are things you feel have not been covered, go ahead, leave a comment below. We will read them. We got a ton of exciting things on the way. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Iron Culture. Go ahead, leave that rating and review on iTunes. Help us out with that battle. The #1 fitness podcast, the number 93rd in health and fitness. Go ahead and figure that one out. We'll see you every single Monday. Catch you in that next episode.